Welcome to the next lesson in the Advanced C# course brought to you by Tuts Plus. Now in this lesson I'm going to take you through a rather vast topic within the C# language, and that is LINQ. Now LINQ stands for Language Integrated Query, and with the adoption of it into the C# language we've been allowed to write more expressive query type formats, which are really just some syntactical sugar within the C# language that tells the compiler to dig down into some new extension methods on the IEnumerable type. And if you're unfamiliar with extension methods, go back a couple lessons and you can check out my video on the extension method and how to use them and what they are. So as I said, really, LINQ is just some syntactical sugar to make the compiler execute some extension methods to do some filtering of some IEnumerable collections and ultimately get down into the specific data that you really want to work with or that you're really looking for. So let's go ahead and jump into some code, and I'm going to show you the simplest way to learn LINQ. Hey there, look at that. We're back in Visual Studio, and I'm going to once again do the new project. Select Console Application and click OK. So here we are back in our boilerplate code, and as I mentioned, I'm going to take you through the absolute simplest way to learn about what LINQ is. And if you understand the basic concepts of LINQ and how to apply it to collections, you can write LINQ queries against absolutely any collection out there in the same exact way. So if you get the basic concepts, you can take it to the extreme and query some very complicated objects that are put together in some collections. So the way that we do that is we need to start with some source data, some actual data that we want to query against using this LINQ query syntax. So we're going to create our first collection, and what I'm going to do here might seem a little strange to you, but bear with me for a moment. So I'm going to create a var sample, and I'm going to call this sample, or I'm going to give this sample the value of I enjoy writing Uber software in C#. Now, I don't really know what that means, but it's merely a sentence, and it's an example of what I want to do to show you how to use LINQ. And you might look at this and say, well, what are you doing? That's just a string. It's not really a collection. Well, actually, it is a collection. A string is a collection. It's an array of characters. So just because it doesn't look like it implements an IEnumerable, or it doesn't look like one of those cool fancy generic collections that have been added to C# over the last several versions, just because a type is an array doesn't mean you can't use LINQ against it. And you can use LINQ against an array in the same way you can use it against, say, a generic list. The concepts are all the same, which is very cool. So this is how we're going to dive into LINQ. So what I want to do is I want to write a basic query that's going to pull out all of the vowels that are found within this sentence. So that might seem very, very infantile or very simple, but the concepts of how we're going to write these LINQ queries are the same regardless if we're trying to pull vowels out of a sentence or if we're trying to pull custom people objects or person objects out of a very large generic list, which we'll get to in a few moments. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a var results. This is where I'm going to store the result of my query, of my LINQ query, and now I'm going to go ahead and write it. Now, if you have any experience with writing database queries, then this is going to seem a little bit more familiar to you, and if you're not, if you're just used to writing the everyday run-of-the-mill C# code where you have objects and you hit dot and you access properties and methods, this is going to seem a little bit strange, but as I said before, this is nothing more than a little bit of syntactical sugar that the compiler interprets as having to call some extension methods out there to do the same exact thing. So what we're going to do here, as I said before, it's very similar to query syntax when you're trying to hit a database and pull data out in a select statement. The difference in this example is that instead of starting with a select statement, we actually start with the from. So we specify from C in sample. Now what this is telling the compiler to do is in this from statement, I want you to loop through all the values within the sample collection and assign each one of them individually to the C variable. And now once we have that, we can start to do some filtering, but to keep things very simple so far, I'm just merely going to end with my select statement because in the LINQ query syntax, select is the last statement that you put within your LINQ query. So now I'm going to select each one of the characters within sample, and I want to select it. So what that's going to do is it's going to take all of those characters, put them together into a collection, and assign them into result. So now what I can do with that at the end is I can loop through all of them in a for each statement. I can say for each item in result, and I can do a console write line and merely write item to the console. So let's go ahead and do a control F5, and there you go. Now I've basically printed out the entire sentence, one character per line on the console. And as you can see here, I enjoy writing Uber software in C#. Okay, so that's kind of interesting, but like I said, I want to filter this. I want to pull out only the vowels that I found within this sentence. Well, the way that we start doing that is by adding some filtering to it. And if, as I said before, if you're familiar with writing queries to a database, you do some of that filtering via a where clause. Well, LINQ is the same way. I can specify a where clause, and now I can start to add some rules to this as to what I would like to pull out of this collection or of this sentence. So the checks I want to do here is where C is equal to a vowel, so where it's equal to A, E, I, O, or U. So I will say where C is equal to A, or C is equal to E, or C is equal to I, or C is equal to O, or finally C is equal to U. And yes, I know this is a little bit verbose and you could do this a little bit better, but I'm merely trying to show you some of the basic operators that you can include from the C# language into LINQ, and everything just gels together. So now I can save this and do a control F5. And now you can see here, I'm getting only the vowels, but I see something kind of interesting here. It looks like LINQ has looped through all of the characters within this sentence, but it only started pulling out the E. So I see an E here. It skipped the I. I see the E, and then the O, and then the two I's, and then the U and the E. So it looks like it skipped that first I, and the reason why it did that is because I'm only checking here on the lowercase letters. Well, if I really wanted to make sure I caught everything and I didn't really care about the case, then I could merely write the sample as sample.toLower so that it's going to lowercase all of the characters within the sentence and then go ahead and run them through this gauntlet. And if I do a control F5 at this point, now I picked up that first I, and I've listed all of the vowels found within this sentence. Okay, well that's neat, I guess. But it's still very simple, and really what if I wanted to do some other things, and I start to think about writing database queries, and I think one of the other logical things that I tend to do is I tend to order my results in a certain way. So let's say, yeah, I found these results, I found these vowels, but I want to order them now. So let's see how we would do something like that. Well, it's quite simple. We merely add another statement in here called order by. Now, what do you want to order by? Well, since I'm really only working with the variable C within this query, which is a character, that's really all I have to do some ordering by. So I'm really going to say I want to order this by C, and now I can save and rerun this. And now as you can see, I have ordered my result here in alphabetical order, which really means I've ordered this in ascending order, which means I've started at the lowest value, which is A, and have worked my way all the way up to the largest, which is U. So by default, if you don't specify any options at the order by clause, it is going to order everything in ascending order. Now you can explicitly do this using the ascending keyword, and if I do a control F5, you're going to see the same result. Nothing really changed. But if you wanted to do it in descending order, if you wanted to order your results in a LINQ query descending, you can use the descending keyword and hit control F5. And as you see, I've started with the U and I've gone all the way down to the A. So I can play around with the ordering a little bit. I can order in ascending order, which is the default, or descending order by using the descending keyword. Well, that's interesting as well, but let's say I wanted to figure out a little bit more heuristic data. I really wanted to extract some information out of this, not just specifically what's coming out of the sentence, but what if I wanted to figure out how many A's it found, how many E's, how many I's, how many O's? Well, in the world of querying a database, you would do that via a group or a group by clause within your query, and you do that the same exact way within LINQ with a minor tweak to how we're doing things here. So at this case, I'm not really concerned about the order by at this point. We'll add it back in a moment. But what I want to do is I want to start to group. Well, there just so happens to be a group keyword. Now, group requires two things. You have to group something by something else. Now This is going to seem a little strange for this example, and in the next example I'll show you a little bit more, but you want to group something that you're working with within your query, and since I'm really only working with characters in this, that's really all I can order by, so I can, or that I can group by, so that I can group C, and I want to group it by, well, since C is just a character, there's not a whole lot else that I can do with it, I want to group C by C. Now I know that looks a little strange, but bear with me and I'll show you a little bit more interesting of an example in a few moments. But as you see here, if I try to build this, it's not going to build because it's expecting a semicolon after C. So this is the first kind of little example or gotcha in change of syntax when you're using a group by. If you're doing a group statement, LINQ or the compiler, when it sees this LINQ statement, assumes that the group statement is the last statement within a LINQ query. So I have to do a semicolon here, which means I do not do a select if I'm doing a group. Now that's just, in general, there are other instances where you could do a select, but in this case, I'm just going to do the simplest functionality to get you to understand how to use LINQ. So now I've grouped everything. I've grouped all of the characters, which just so happen to be vowels. So I've grouped all of the vowels by the character and assigned that into result. Now, if I try to control F5, you're going to see something that's a little strange here. You're going to see a system.link lookup and a grouping, and this is a little strange. I don't know what's going on here. Well, what's happening here, if I were to set a breakpoint and do an F5, I will get to the point where I can see that result is actually a grouped enumerable, and if I were to execute this into my item, is actually a grouping. Well, let's see what exactly a grouping is. So if I were to get rid, or not really get rid of this console write line, but I'm going to add in here item dot. And now if you take a look in here, you see a lot of things that you would typically see within an IEnumerable or a collection, which makes sense because everything you do within LINQ is going to return an IEnumerable, but one addition is this concept of a key. So when you have a grouping, you have a key and then you have some value. So it's kind of looking a little bit like a dictionary in some ways, in that you have a key and then each key is associated with some sort of group or collection or IEnumerable of data. So if I try to print out key and I save and I do a control F5 now, aha, so the key is what I was grouping by in my LINQ query. So I see I, E, O, U, and A. So once again, I could come back in here because that seems a little strange. I could order it. I could order it by C again, and I can save and do a control F5, and now I'm doing it in ascending order, A, E, I, O, and U. But now not only have I grouped these things by the vowel that I have found within my sentence, I also have a few other properties that I can use in here as well. So I'm going to format this a little bit different so you can see what else I'm actually getting within this grouping. So I'm going to have the first parameter, and then I'm going to do a hyphen and the second parameter. And so now I'm going to have item.key, and my second parameter, I'm actually going to do item.count. So if you see here, I can do a control F5, and now I'm getting the count. So after I have grouped all of these vowels into these I groupings, or into this grouping collection, I get the vowels as the keys. So I get the item that I was using as the key, followed by a number of things that I can do with the results that are in there. And in this case, I have a collection of those vowels that I found within there as a secondary property, and I can grab those out via the count method. Now, I know that seems a little contrived and it does seem a little strange for this example, but let's work through another example where that's going to make a little bit more sense. So I will go ahead and modify this just ever so slightly. I'm going to go into my code here and I'm going to create a new class, and I'm sure you were expecting this. It's going to be a person class, and I'm going to add in 3 properties. I'm going to add in, once again, a string first name. I'm going to add in another property, string last name, and finally a final property that is an integer, and it's going to be age. Now I'm going to modify my data set here to, instead of being a sentence, I'm going to create a list, a generic list called people. This is going to be equal to a new list of person objects, and then I'm going to initialize this to a couple different people objects here. So I'm going to do a new person who has a first name of equal to John, a last name equal to Doe, and an age equal to 25. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this and paste it in here a few more times so we have a basic set of data to start working with to write some queries against. So we'll just paste in here like 4 more. So there's going to be a John Doe, there's going to be a Jane Doe, and she's going to be 26. And then we'll have a John, we'll say Williams, and he's going to be 40. And then we'll have a Samantha, and she's also going to be a Williams, and she is going to be 35. And then we're going to have a Bob Walters, and he is going to be 12. So we're going to go ahead and save that. So now we have our data set, our data collection that we want to work with to pull out some data via LINQ. Well, now that we have the basic concepts of LINQ down, writing the query is going to be nearly exactly the same. So let's go through some of the same operations that we did for parsing through that sentence with LINQ. So we're going to start with our from clause, and we're going to say from P, and that's the value or the variable that I'm going to use to refer to all of the individual people found within my list in people, because that is the IEnumerable or the collection that I want to dig data out of. And now I want to do a select. So I'm going to select all of these people into my result, and now I can once again go through all the items I found in my result, and I'm going to simply print out item.firstname and item.lastname. So I can save this, do a Control F5, and now I've listed all the people in here. I have John Doe, Jane Doe, John Williams, Samantha Williams, and Bob Walters. Okay, so what else can we do now? Well, let's start to filter this a little bit. Let's say I wanted to get all the people out of this collection that happen to be less than 25 years old. So we'll say where p.age is less than 25. So now if I were to save this and hit Control F5, now I see that there are only one person. There's only one person in this entire list that's less than 25, and that happens to be Bob Walters, who is only 12. So if I were to change that to say everybody that was less than 30, then you would expect to get 3 results: Jane Doe, John Doe, and Bob Walters. Okay, so now we can definitely filter on any properties that we found in there via the where clause, and we can also do a number of additional checks within a single where clause. So we could say where the age is less than 30 and p.lastname is equal to Doe. So now we can check for that one. We can do save and Control F5, and we get 2 results. Both Jane and John Doe are both less than 30. So you can see you can add a number of ands or ors within your where clause to kind of put together multiple filters or multiple gauntlets, if you will, to see if all of these individual objects within our collection satisfy all of those checks. So now we can, let's switch this back to less than 30. And let's just say that I wanted to do something similar to how I did in the previous example. I want to order these things a little bit. Well, I could say order by. I could order by p.lastname. Save, and let's get rid of this where clause for now so we can see a little bit more results. And I'm going to change the formatting here a little bit because this is kind of bothering me a little bit. Let's make this look a little bit more legitimate. So we'll say item.lastname, and we'll say item.firstname. So we're going to show this in last name, first name format. So now we're formatting this by last name, comma, first name, and we're ordering our LINQ query by our last name. So we have both of the Does, then the Walters, and then the Williams. So that's some basic ordering there. Once again, like I said, we can order this in descending order as well. Control F5. So now we're doing Williams, Walters, and then Doe. So that's kind of interesting. And now the other interesting aspect from the previous example is the grouping statement. So I want to do the same thing this time, and you're going to see now how I can do some slightly different things with a collection of objects that have multiple properties. So now if I want to order everything by last name still, but now I wanted to group those things by, say, last name and do a little bit of digging into that type of data. So I can do my group by statement. So I can group all of those P variables, those objects within my collection, by p.lastname. So I can group it by a property on that object. And as you can remember before, I have to end my statement here, so I will do a semicolon here, get rid of my select statement, And I'm going to have to change my for each loop in my console write line just ever so slightly. And if you remember from the previous example, when you do a grouping, you have the concept of a key, and then you have the data that's represented by that key. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to write out the key. So I'm going to do a console write line, and I'm going to write out item.key. And now I can do a for each loop because I have now a collection of items or a collection of objects that are associated with that key. So I can do a for each statement. So I can say for each p in item. I can say console write line p. Well, we'll format this a little bit. We'll say last name comma first name again. So we can do now p dot last name and p dot first name. So we can save this, do a control F5, and now you see that we are starting to group these things. And let's add a little bit more formatting in here just so we can read our example here. Control F5, I've added a tab in there. So now we're grouping everything by the last name. So we have the Williams last name, and we have two people that we see here, the Walters and the Doe. And we can also add in there as well the count as well. There's nothing that says we can't do that. So let's go ahead and concatenate onto this key a hyphen, and then we'll go ahead and do item.count, which is going to give us a count of all of the objects that are being associated to this key. So now I can do a save again and do a control F5, and now you can see that I'm saying that there are two Williams, and that's John and Samantha, one Walters, which is Bob, and two Does, which is Jane and John. So there you have it, really. That's the absolute basics of LINQ and how to write LINQ queries in this kind of expression syntax that seems a little strange. It's a little far-fetched and a little bit different from the normal C# code that you're used to in writing objects and dots and methods and things of that nature, but it really gives us this kind of cool SQL query feel to be able to work with our data. And if you are working with any sort of data, as long as it is a collection that implements the IEnumerable interface, then you absolutely get to query that data source this way. So you can be querying anything from simple arrays of characters or strings or integers all the way up to collections of data being returned back from a database via LINQ to SQL or the Entity Framework or nhibernate, but all of that is definitely part of another course. So I hope you kind of start to see the power and the expressiveness of LINQ as a syntactical sugar thing that's been added in for us, because I think it's very cool and it really allows you to do some pretty cool things with lists and just being able to pull out just enough data that you need to work with. So I hope you find some use for that in your day-to-day activities, and I'll see you in the next lesson.